welcome to the Deep Sea Podcast, a punk take on a science podcast about everything deep sea. I'm Dr. Thomas Lindley, and we will be joined later by the professor, and you'll understand why we have to do it a little bit remotely, because the game is afoot. We're having adventures, stuff's going on. So we did catch up with him, so you will be hearing from the prof a little bit later. First, a little update from me. Me and friend of the show, Kat Bolstad, went to the Kaikoura Canyon, which is some really deep water just off the South Island of New Zealand, to test out our new light lure and camera system. And we just want to say a massive thanks to the New Zealand Whale and Dolphin Trust and Otago University, who took us out on their little sperm whale research vessel, and particularly to Will and Tommy, who looked after me while I was very, very seasick, because it was a tiny little aluminium boat and I am not good on small boats. So I wasn't the best company because I was acid washing their hull for most of it, but they were lovely company. And so thanks for hanging out with me and letting us get our gear in the water. That was really, really valuable testing that we couldn't have got done anywhere else. And some amazing little observations there. I'm not usually a whaley person, but it's hard to ignore such spectacular whale sightings. So they were out there monitoring the sperm whales, and so we could get really quite close and seeing the whales diving. And it was fascinating to watch them do their work, actually. They've got such a good read on the animals that they know when it's taken its sort of last big breath before a dive. They can see in its body language that it's getting ready to dive. They know how long they dive for, like right down to the individuals, like, oh, this one tends to dive a bit deeper, this one tends to dive a bit longer. So really cool just to sort of observe them doing their work. And then when we were testing the camera system, we were just bobbing along. We've got the engines off, and we had a really special sort of chance encounter. So we talked on the whale episode about the super deep diving whales, the beaked whales, and a pod of 3 Gray's beaked whales came really, really close. You can see it on my sort of Twitter and Instagram and Blue Sky. I shared the video, and a mobile phone always makes things look further away than they are. But honestly, we could hear their breath. I could have thrown a rock at them if I was so inclined. And it was an incredible encounter that, I know people who are studying cetaceans and who get super excited about seeing a beaked whale on the horizon, just catching a glimpse. And these were right alongside us. We could see the scar patterns. We could hopefully identify the individuals. So that was really, really special. Yeah. And it was just fantastic to be along with the gang. It's not all glamour and fun, because in between beautiful whale observations, me vomiting, we were also handed dip nets to try and collect whale poop or whale skin or anything that fell off a whale that might be useful for genetics. So it was just lovely to be along with them and to get over some deep water. And it's nice to be able to hand deploy deep sea gear. So we were going down to about 300 meters and deploying by hand. And it is a good workout. So it can be done, but I think I'd rather have a winch. But we got a workout out there. As ever, we want to say a huge thank you to our patrons who continue to support the show. This would not happen without that. We do it for free, but there are certain admin costs, and that helps us meet those and keep it going. And just to mention that Alan will often share his sort of first-hand pictures. We have a lot of chat. A lot of things are exclusively mentioned in the Discord for the patrons. So you tend to hear about some deep sea stuff ahead of the curve. So if you're on the fence, that's quite a nice way of getting a little insider track. We also often talk to the community for show ideas. What would you like to hear about? And they're really good at consolidating the deep sea news, actually. So massive thank you to the patrons. If you can't support to that level, absolutely fine. But also a review, a little bit of rating on whatever app you're listening to us really helps the show. It makes the algorithm happy, and then we turn up in people's feeds. So thank you so much for everyone who supports the show. A little bit of deep sea news. And as mentioned, these were actually from the Patreon. So thank you, team, for spotting these. Uranus's potential for alien life. I'm a professional scientist, so I didn't make the joke, that poor unfortunate planet. Anyway, so there's been a more recent analysis of the Voyager 2 data. So this was collected actually back in 1986, but we have lots of fun new ways of crunching big data and looking for patterns in it. So it actually revealed some new data about the planet. So it turns out that when they recorded that data, its magnetosphere was unusually compressed. And because we only got this glimpse of Uranus, we assumed that was the norm. But the new research indicates that actually might only be 5% of the time. So it is a regular cycle, but it's not Uranus in its sort of normal state. It oscillates through these. That isn't particularly deep sea relevant, but what the paper did also go on to talk about was the potential for liquid water on the planet's moons. And in particular, its two outer moons, Titania and Oberon, which are the more likely candidates for harboring liquid water oceans. So do go back and listen to our fantastic interview with NASA's astrobiologist Kevin Hand about what life might be like on these ocean worlds and how they can receive heat and energy without sun. You know, Uranus is way out there, so you assume like there's no possible way for life, but the actual chemical requirements and the warming energy can be provided geothermally or by the actual push-pull of the gravity of the planet, which we found super exciting. Part of the interview that really stuck with me was that even if there isn't life on these ocean moons, you could transplant a hadal amphipod from Earth, from one of the deep trenches, to one of these ocean planets like the moons around Saturn or Jupiter, so one of these ocean moons, and it might live long enough to starve. The extreme deep sea life we have here could, without a spacesuit, without any life support, could just live in these ocean moons, which really, really stuck with me. That's incredible. So well done, amphipods, little heroes. Speaking of amphipods, a new amphipod just dropped, and actually by friend of the show and occasional co-host back in the early episodes, Johanna Weston. So it's a new amphipod from the Atacama Trench. That is the trench that runs down the west coast of South America. And it's not just a new species, but they erected a new genus to put it in because it was a little bit different from everything else we know about. So it's collected from almost 8 kilometers deep. I'm going to try and be careful with the Latin name. Dulcibella camanchaca. It's quite a large amphipod, almost 4 centimeters long, and it is an active predator with specialized legs for grappling prey. So these are a bit like the Prince XLA amphipods we often saw on the baited landers, where they will almost rugby tackle and grab other smaller amphipods. So really active predators. So you may be wondering where the prof is. He is out in Antarctica, and we had a bit of a casual meetup to talk about what's going on out there. I will be heading out there in early January. So yeah, let's jump over to hear from the prof and how things are going in Antarctica. So I am joined from, actually, I'm struggling with the new vessel name. I always know it as Pressure Drop.
No, it's called Dagon now, and it has been for some time, so you're just going to have to catch up with that.
Paint job, Dagon.
I still struggle with it as well, and we'd renamed all the landers as well, which is still doing my head in.
I think the sub's the hard one, going from limiting factor to Baku.
Yes. It's marginally easier because it made it green. That was a good move.
Yeah, that sort of sits well in the brain as like, now it is a different beast.
Yeah. Anyway, we haven't said where we are. Do you want me to tell you where we are?
Go on. Why is this interesting?
This is interesting because I'll tell you a little story here of why this conversation is taking place. So about 2 or 3 years ago, I decided that it would be a really good idea to come to Antarctica on the ship because we've obviously got a big program going on, a big scientific thing going on, and we're doing fracture zones and trenches and abyssal plains and all the rest of it. So we had Antarctica on here. And so for the last 2 years, we had it all planned out. We're going to go to the South Orkney Trench, and we're going to do some great work in a nice cold sub-zero trench in Antarctica. And as per procedures and protocols, we went into quarantine in Chile for 5 or 6 days before joining the ship. And this is where I met Shaylyn Potter, who is from an expedition company who's come down to help us make sure we don't break the law in Antarctica. But I'll introduce Shaylyn later. But on the first day, she came to me and said, you know, that whole area is under ice right now. So 2 years, 3 years in the planning, the Weddell Sea has been breaking up, and it's the worst sea ice for 15 years. So in the space of a couple of days, we rewrote the entire expedition to come over to the South Shetland Trench, which is where we are now. And I just did a couple of dives in the sub, and we've done about 24 landers, mapped a whole bunch of stuff, and it's cold.
Nice.
Yeah, I think the first day we met, we were just having coffee kind of casually and chit-chatting about what, your plans might look like for the expedition. And I said something like, well, what are you going to do, or what's your backup plan if the ice doesn't clear? And people said, well, what do you mean?
The ice is supposed to be clear.
It's the summer.
And I thought, what do you mean? What do I mean? Yeah. And then we got everybody involved looking at the ice charts and thought, well, we can't go there. And so then a new plan evolved.
Yeah, so here we are. We're in Antarctica, and we've been here for, 2 weeks now. Got another week or so to go. And then, actually, I'm getting off, but Shaylyn's got another month to go yet. And then you're coming down here, Tom, eh?
Yes. Yeah. So any advice on what to pack? And I'm not sure. I think we're going to have the same problem. Everyone is continuing with the plan, but I think we're going to have to go somewhere else because it sounds like the Bellenhausen Sea is full of ice.
Well, I know someone who can tell you that. Shaylyn, get on your ice machine.
I know, we'd have to look at the ice charts. Yeah, kind of constant reorganizing of things down in this part of the world.
I've reached that last minute sort of level of panic where it kind of just is what it is. I'm kind of going limp. It's been so stressful getting ready for this trip. And there's been so much to build, and then equipment issues and vessel capability issues. And yeah, I'm just kind of burnt out and gone limp now. I'm just like, something's going to happen. I'll get to see some ice.
You just need the right clothes. That's what you need. It's all about the clothes. It's all about the fashion.
I did get a weird orange thing I'm rather proud of. It's kind of a balaclava, kind of its own hood kind of thing.
Ooh.
It looks awful, so I'm really happy with that. It's bright orange because orange is more than a color. Orange equals safety.
It does. But there's a new motto on here, and it's science before safety.
Nice.
It's not catching on, and the captain doesn't like it. But
neither does the insurance company.
It's going to stick. I'm going to get a T-shirt with it made, and it'll become a thing.
Excellent. So speaking of the sea ice, you guys managed to collect a bit? Did you fish some out recently?
About 2 hours ago, yeah. Got a big chunk of it on the ship now.
For proper science reasons, of course.
It's being prepared for drinks on the Sky Bar in about an hour's time.
We got a deadline.
I want to clarify about the sea ice for the drinks, because it's very important to note that it's not sea ice, because sea ice forms every year. It's an annual thing. We have collected glacial ice to put in the drinks, which is much cooler because it can be potentially thousands of years old ice. And so when we put it in our drinks, it should be, snap, crackling, and popping, all of that really ancient air.
Oh, that's cool. We had some drinks with that on the Japanese vessel, didn't we, Alan? And it did fizz and release dinosaur viruses.
Yeah, but they brought that block of ice back from Antarctica. We drank drinks with Antarctica. I did it once when I was down here on the Spanish one, but then they brought out some in Japan, but they had brought that block of ice back from Antarctica to Japan.
Yeah.
And so we were drinking Antarctic ice somewhere near Guam on a Japanese vessel or something. It was really bizarre.
Extra refreshing, though. Someone's going to start marketing that like all the deep sea water.
No, I think they do. I'm pretty sure
you
can buy like glacial water, melted, glacial ice.
Shaylyn and I, amongst many others, including Todd Bond, who you remember from the podcast previously, we have been in the sea and not in a submarine.
Oh, wow.
You want me to elaborate on that?
Yeah, so you did an ice plunge.
Yeah, we went to Deception Island because the weather was really bad for a couple of days. So we drove into Deception Island, parked up, had to walk around the old whaling station, and then plunged into the sea. And for several seconds to minutes to hours, figured we were probably going to die of hypothermia. It was really good.
What was the water temperature? Do you know?
We measured it with an RBR. It was 1.5 on the surface, but it was being heated by the volcano. So I'm grateful for geothermal heating.
And it's wind chill, isn't it? Like because we could get water close to that off Aberdeen, but just the wind chill you get there.
This is not like going into Aberdeen. This is something else.
Yeah, when you get out, it's not so nice when you get out and have to walk back to put on your clothes. So that's the worst part.
A great thing to say you've done, though. Good bucket list stuff.
Yeah, that was really good fun. Anyway, Shaylyn should introduce herself here, because obviously we haven't had her on the show before. So I think it'd be a good time now to tell us why you're interesting.
No pressure.
I'm Shaylyn, and I first started coming down to Antarctica in 2015, and I was originally working as a scuba diver. But of course, with scuba, we're only allowed to go to 40 meters recreationally. And in Antarctica, you have this really weird kind of phenomena with the ice, the big icebergs around, and it's scouring all of the shallow areas. So basically within your scuba depths, you're in this ice scour zone, and it's kind of boring to dive in, but I could be looking down the walls and see that there's a lot of life deeper than that. And so I got really invested and interested in what might be deeper than scuba depths. And I started getting into using ROVs on expedition ships, and then eventually trained to be a manned submersible pilot. So the past couple of years, I've been working as a sub-pilot on an expedition ship, and kind of my primary place of interest and work is in Antarctica.
Nice.
So you don't do the Arctic then? You're not a polar person, you're specifically Antarctica?
Well, I do the Arctic, but I don't find it as interesting as Antarctica. So I try to focus my time down here. Just more to see. I think it's more interesting.
Does that make you a polar snob?
I am definitely a polar snob, and a little bit, of a marine life snob as well.
It'd be really interesting to go into, having experienced both in quite a lot of detail, what are the differences? Why do you love the South over the North?
Antarctica is just so unique. If you think about where it is geographically, Antarctica separated from South America about 30 million years ago. So it's been isolated both geographically and then later thermally and then physically with the Antarctic circumpolar current for many, many years. And because of that, it's allowed for species to evolve and display high endemism here in Antarctica. So you'll see species here that you won't see anywhere else in the world.
That's true. The North Pole feels more connected. There's more currents going around there. It feels easier to access.
Yeah, it'll be easier for species to transfer to the Arctic from other regions, but to get to Antarctica would just be so challenging. So like species dispersal just doesn't really happen so much between the other oceans and the Southern Ocean.
Very cool. And then Antarctica in particular, particularly with us in the deep sea end of things, like it's a species generator.
Yes.
There's so many things that went there really radiated because they're cold adapted. There's for some reason also deep adapted. And then they travel out along the trenches, you know, the snailfish, the zooacids, the eupouts, they all seem to have like generated lots of variation in this place, and then that let them then radiate out from there. So that's what I'm most interested in from going down there, is like seeing maybe the seat of some of these lineages we're so familiar with. This is sort of the powerhouse that churned out a lot of deep sea species.
I don't know
that's
your dreams
absolutely
and
true.
aspirations, Tom, but I reckon you're wrong.
Oh, really? Okay.
We've been doing a lander survey from 1,000 meters to 5,200 meters, and we've done 24 now or something like that. So there's about 50 cameras worth of data. And after 2,300 meters, there's almost nothing but Coryphaenoides armatus. Literally nothing. Tonight, about 2 hours ago, was the first time we saw a single eelpout. We'd expected to be this like amazing, like super diverse fish fauna. Below, or at least sort of less than 2,300 meters, there are icefish. It's always solitary, not very friendly, and then the big Imacruras. And I swear that's about it.
There are over 200 snailfish hiding there somewhere under some rocks.
I saw one on the sub yesterday. I saw one snaily that I didn't recognise on the sub, and that was at 2,700. And somewhere else deeper, we saw a snailfish, but right on the horizon on one of the landers. So technically we've seen two, but two things are interesting. One is there's hardly any fish here for some reason. I don't really know why. But the interesting thing is the Coryphaenoides numbers are absolutely astronomical through the roof of 4,000 meters.
That's interesting.
I've never seen so many fish in my life. And they're all ridiculously infested with parasites. They've got pox, they've got parasitic copepods, they've got leeches hanging off their underbellies, they've got that fungal infection that's prizing their eyes at their heads. They're the ugliest bunch of lepers I think I've ever seen in my life.
Wow.
Yeah, so there's a story in there going on somewhere. But on the flip side, when we do a dive, we've done 1 to 5,000 and 1 to 2,500. And they are the most diverse and abundant deep sea fauna I've ever seen by a long way. There was just every single thing you can imagine there, just not really fish.
Yeah.
Does that ruin all your hopes and dreams?
When you think about Antarctica in general, I think it would ruin people's dreams maybe if they're like fish people. But for invertebrate lovers, then Antarctica is a really good place.
Yeah, great jellyfish too, and some squid. And I mean, the 5,200 meter side, remember, like most of the times we dive to 5,000 meters, what you see is interesting, but you don't see that much. And you see some really quirky little things. And during a dive, you probably take a few hundred photographs, and it's good, solid data. Here, I took nearly 2,000 photographs just on the internal camera. And I still don't think we would even quantified all of it. It was just thousands of brittle stars, sea stars, urchins, anemones, every possible shape and size. It was absolutely incredible. Honestly, it was so cool. And you think it's at 5,200 meters.
You've been sharing some pics on the Discord. They look really nice.
Yeah, that's nothing. That's just the first. That's all I can squeeze through the sky pipes. When I get a chance, I'll do some more. But yeah, super cool.
What's been really interesting for me, because most of my work, so all the studies that I do, because now I'm about to start my PhD studying continental shelf seafloor biodiversity. And so I'm quite familiar with the literature of that region. And the submersibles I pilot, we can go to 300 meters. So it's just kind of getting barely into that deep sea realm, but we're on that continental shelf of the peninsula. And we do see a really high abundance and also quite a lot of diversity of pycnogonids. And as Tom mentioned, we think they originated and diversified from this region. And we also see quite a lot of octopus. And just the biomass and diversity at those depths is extremely high, particularly for invertebrate animals. So it's been really interesting for me to see deeper from the landers that we're just not seeing either that biomass or diversity. And I've been really, really surprised. We saw one pycnogonid and 0 octopus on the landers. So for me, that's been super fascinating to see that stark difference.
Yesterday we saw one sea spider at the end, which is the picnogonids, and a little octopus. I'll share the photograph for the podcast, but we came across a tiny little octopus. We called it Curly because it was a little white curly thing with big eyes.
Adorable.
There you go. Quite a lot of squid though, eh? There was a lot of squid up in the 1,000 to 2,000 meter range, and lots of really nice little red jellies, the Tracheomedusa, just the ones that just hover past. We've got loads of cool footage of those. Those are really abundant. Yeah. So anyway, Shaylyn, you told me you did a dive in the caldera at Deception Island.
Deception Island is one of my favorite dive sites, both scuba and, deeper submersible depths in the peninsula. And I think it's just so unique compared to other regions. Like, I can see a photo, I can recognize that it's at Deception Island. I don't really know why. It's just, I can just recognize the assemblages of species. And there's not a lot of, information or literature on it about why it's so unique there. But I imagine the input of the hot water and maybe sulfur or whatever's coming out of that active caldera is kind of shaping that ecosystem. But it's quite different than any other dive. I dive quite a lot around the South Shetland Islands, and it doesn't look anything like what it looks like around Deception.
I think for those listening might not know what Deception Island is. It's part of the Shetland Isles, which is west of the peninsula, but there's a caldera, and it's basically a 10-kilometer diameter or something, and there's a section which is broke off, so it's filled with water, so you can sail a ship into it. And there's an old British whaling base on the right-hand side as you come in. There's a Spanish research station there. I think there's an Argentinian one there. And I remember I went there about 9 years ago and just thought it was absolutely phenomenal. It's full of chin-strap penguins and all this kind of stuff. And it's just very, very unique in terms of the visual imagery of it. It's nothing quite like it. And when we were talking about this trip, I said to Captain Jim, it's like, if we do have to run from bad weather, what's our plan? And he's like, oh, there's all these bays and stuff up in King George Island or Livingston or whatever. And I'm like, all right, but if we get a chance, we should go to Deception Island. It's the coolest place. And right enough, a bit of bad weather came along and we were charging in there. It was brilliant.
Natural port.
Yeah, there's nothing really, as Shaylyn says, even above the water, there's nothing quite like it. It's just cool. Really cool.
Is there a difference in the slope elevation in this part of the world? Is it something about the sea ice pushes it down, or it's higher? Like our usual deep sea markers, when we do them sort of based on the shore, when we do like slope depth and things like that, is it right that it's slightly different here? And so our usual deep sea boundaries don't fit very well in Antarctica?
Yes. The 200-meter continental shelf is something that is unique to Western Europe. That's why the 200-meter mark was more or less decided that this is the start of the deep sea. But the continental shelf running right around Antarctica is actually 500 meters on average, not 200. And most places in the world don't have a continental shelf at all. So the 200-meter mark is a load of nonsense, I think.
It's imperialism.
Yes. Basically. But there are these big scars. The thing that's unique about it is what Shaylyn was touching on, these big chunks of ice that decide to leave Antarctica for good. One of the first things they do is they gouge big scars across the continental shelf, and they tear up the seafloor before they ultimately calf off and break off the other and become icebergs to start floating north, which is quite unique to here.
Does that change the habitat types you see? Because most of the inverts you've mentioned are sort of mobile, shorter-lived things. I'm guessing lots of scouring means there isn't big coral reefs and things that take a lot longer to establish.
Yeah, so the icebergs will definitely scour areas in the shallows. I mean, even down 200 meters, you can have iceberg scour. And so often if you're looking for places where you're trying to find diversity, you need to find protected areas or more vertical walls that are going to be protected from ice scour. And yeah, there are definitely, places with more sea ice cover as the sea ice is going to retreat or we're losing kind of glacial coverage. You're exposing new areas of the seafloor and opening up new areas where things can colonize. But also as the ice is breaking off, you're going to deal with more iceberg scour. So it definitely changes assemblages of species you can find. And the early colonizers are going to have to come into those areas first.
And you end up with things specialized to quite a high generation time, because I'm guessing that if it's scoured one place once, the chances are it's going to follow that same path the next piece that breaks off, or they tend to be quite random.
I think it depends on the area. But one of the most interesting things for me working as a sub-pilot is just seeing things that I guess I wouldn't expect to see on the seafloor. So there's this one area, and it's close to the Le Maire Channel. So all the cruise ships go there. It's this beautiful scenery. But there's this place where the shelf comes up to this quiet little shallow shelf, and it's called Iceberg Alley because huge icebergs come in through the steep channel and basically just get stranded there. So we can like to go on little boats and look at the icebergs. And we are going to do a sub dive there. I thought, I don't really want to get in the water because I know the bottom's just scoured because there's massive icebergs stuck on the bottom here and they come through here all the time. But we went on a dive anyway, and I was really, really surprised to see some giant sponges. So some of the volcano sponges and different glass sponges were all over the bottom.
Not quick growing things.
Not quick growing things, or presumably not always quick growing things. So I was really interested to see that, not just, when we're looking at areas that are scoured with ice a lot, you expect to see mobile species like the brittle stars, maybe some fish, or early colonizers like the tunicates and things that can come in and grow rapidly. But you don't expect to see, long-lived glass sponges. And so for me, that was interesting in thinking either these are just lucky sponges that have been here potentially for hundreds or thousands of years to avoid ice, or they're growing faster than we think. Yeah, so it was just really interesting.
Oh, nice. Yeah, when something turns up that's wrong or against your expectations, it's usually a good sign. Embarrassing, but usually a good sign.
Yeah, but I think we just know so little about this ecosystem. There's been a lot of data collected on parts of the continental shelf, especially around the peninsula or around stations. But a lot of the data we have is just presence or absence data. We don't know how it reacts over time. We don't know much about the biology of the animals. And the large volcano sponges, some studies show that they showed no growth within 10 years, and we think they can live up to 10 to 15,000 years. So for a long time, scientists thought, well, these are really slow-growing, long-lived species. But then when the Larsen ice shelf collapsed, within just a few years, we saw those sponges move in and grow really rapidly. Then we realized, well, given the right conditions and enough food resource, then they were able to colonize quickly and rapidly grow. So can't really make assumptions or infer a lot about this ecosystem from, single studies. So it's been really challenging, I think, for science to make progress down here.
Yeah, things are still true, but they might not be true everywhere, even with the same species.
Exactly.
So Tom, why are you coming down here? Are you coming down on Falkor too?
Yeah, I am with Falkor 2 initially, and then I have managed to talk my way onto a touristy expedition-y trip for an extra 2 weeks at the end, because it's costing a small fortune to get me and the gear out there. So I've stuck on a little extra one, and hopefully Kat will be joining me for that one. So I'll be wearing the squid hat for a little bit, and we'll be exploring out there.
That'll be fun.
Yeah.
You just remember and take your thermal underwear though, Because it's quite chilly.
Yes, I'm packing some layers. I'm hoping it'll be okay. I have asked for real wool socks for Christmas, and the in-laws are bringing them from Scotland, so they're going to be proper wool socks, the good stuff.
I've ended up with like 4 or 5 pairs of gloves on this trip, and I'm so bad with gloves. This morning I'd go outside and I had one left and one right from 2 different sets of gloves. I don't know what I've done with them. I'm just not very good at gloves.
Well, that's better than showing up with 2 rights.
Yeah, I thought luck was on my side this morning, where I've got 2 out of 6 pairs. And oh, very good. It's all very cold though. You just stand like penguins wearing a massive kind of goose jacket. Keep going, this is fun. I'm not freezing at all. I can feel all my toes.
Is that where the beard helps? Is it a little extra layer of defense?
Well, can we talk about the beard?
Yeah.
Because I think the beard's important.
Yeah.
I've never had a beard before. I've been very clean shaven and rough looking for a long time, but never sort of committed to anything you could call a beard. And I still wouldn't really call it a beard. I'd call it a nuisance, if anything.
Are you through the itchy stage?
More or less. Only through
that's
encouragement from young Jurgen.
No.
He's been mentoring me.
No.
What?
He's been whining about it being itchy all day.
Thank you. This is what we need. This is the real journalism.
Well, maybe there's a couple of times I've mentioned it might be a bit itchy.
But he doesn't go on. He's very tough and outdoorsy.
Yeah, I'm very quiet in these things. I like to suffer in silence.
You do. You're a hero.
Yeah.
It's not for you to use that word. It's for other people, but you are.
Exactly. Oh, I know that. But, it's a weird one because I've left it too late, because there's a big chunk of it is grey, which is very disturbing. It doesn't do anything for me other than make me look considerably older and even more of an international hobo than I was already. And the rest of it's a kind of ginger colour. And so it's doing nothing for me. I'll say that right now. And several people have said to me, you look terrible. You look truly awful with that thing on your face. And so, yeah, it's a real livener. Yeah, it's great.
Well, compressed on Zoom, I thought it rather suited you, but yeah, maybe you got to see it live.
I was thinking about taking it off for Christmas.
Can you gift it to someone? Can you take it off and give it to someone?
I was going to try and get the whole thing preserved in resin, so it could be sent to a museum somewhere. But I don't know. I'm not into beards. Todd Bond obviously has the biggest beard in the world.
It's quite intimidating. Like it's hard to be bearded around that.
He confessed. I've got a good photo actually. I'll send you a picture of me and him on Deception Island, and you'll see just how much that beard has come on. But he confessed the other day that it doesn't really do anything for you in this cold weather. The wind goes right through it. It turns out it's just not dense enough. You need to be like proper sheep's wool, you know. So the beard thing's pointless. It's a stupid thing. I don't really understand it, but.
Maybe for this one, we'll release a picture of our compared beards, because I had a similar shock to you when over lockdown, everyone grew a beard. It was part of the fun. And mine was red, like really, really red.
Yeah, you look like you'd stolen it off somebody else.
Yeah, it looked like another man's beard on my face.
Yeah.
Maybe, yeah, this is the Christmas beard special, and we'll share those pictures.
Well, that's the story of my beard. This is podcast gold.
It is.
So we should talk a bit more about Antarctica.
What you been up to?
What else have we been up to? We've seen fin whales, penguins, birds. I was explaining to Todd and Shaylyn recently, who are quite prolific birders, that the little piece of my brain that remembers the names of birds, it seems to be somewhat corrupted, I would say is the right word, and all I see are small to medium to large seagulls, and not much else. I can't remember the names, but we've seen a lot of seagulls.
I think birds and knots with me.
We have seen some gulls, kelp gulls, but mainly we're been seeing the Cape petrels. Those are the ones around the ship. But you should see a lot of birds on your trips. You'll see a lot of the albatross crossing the Drake on your way down.
I got to hang out with quite a few albatross last weekend when I was testing the gear down in the Kaikoura Canyon. There's I think we saw 3 species, but again, I'm like you, Alan. I'm just like, oh, that fella's got a slightly grayer head, and then it's a whole different one. But they're big.
I'm just like, Tom, look, there's a seagull the size of a dog. That means it's an albatross of some variety.
I mean, you might not be wrong with that. That's probably a good separator.
This will be a good time to introduce people to, I'll get Shaylyn into this. Ice is not just ice. There's lots of different ways in which it can be characterized. Isn't that right? Yeah,
but as a scientist, I consider myself a lumper, not a splitter.
In ice taxonomy?
Yeah, in ice taxonomy. So I think the splits are a little pedantic, but I think it has, I might be wrong, but something like this. In order for it to be an iceberg, officially, it has to be taller than 5 meters.
Oh.
And if it's...
That's not very big.
Well, it's pretty big. But if it's 1 to 5 meters, then it's a bergy bit. And if it's less than 1 meter, then it's a growler.
Wow. 2 new words.
Yeah.
And this is above sea level, isn't it? So they're considerably bigger below.
Yes. Yeah. So they're floating. So most of the icebergs, depending on its density, will be like 70% or so below.
I learned that from motivational posters. I don't know if it's true.
But there was a big piece of ice we came across quite early on, a couple of weeks ago, and it was 13 miles long, something like that. It was great.
And do they stay berg no matter how big they get, or is there an extra size class?
I don't know if there's bigger, but the ones we saw, and you might see some as well with the flat tops, those are tabular icebergs. So those came from ice shelf, and that's why they look like that.
Ah. Do we sort of differentiate their origin, whether it's sort of glacial or sea ice?
Well, yeah, so it's definitely glacial ice, but you can have a glacier, like a glacial face or a tidewater glacier that will calve off icebergs, and they're quite large, but they're not tabular bergs. I'm not a geologist. You would have to ask somebody else. Devin on board has been able to talk to people about it. I'm just a naturalist and an ice enthusiast.
I'm not sure we should let the rock people have water when it gets hard. I still think it's in our jurisdiction.
Yes.
Just because it's hard like a rock, you can't claim it.
All right. But it's quite unique to Antarctica. So we have the ice sheet in Antarctica, right? So it's snow's falling on the ice field and it's flowing downstream to all these glacial outlets. If it's coming down to the water, touching the seawater and calving into it, that's a tidewater glacier. But in some areas where it's not so steep, the glacier itself, instead of crumbling off, can just keep floating out over the sea. And so it's not actually on the sea floor, it's floating, and that's the ice shelf. And a lot of them have been around for many, many years, thousands of years. And that's one of the concerning things that they're talking about with Antarctica and climate change is the ice shelf collapse, because these ice shelves are acting as buttresses for the ice sheet behind it. Because, over time, or for a long time, they've been relatively stable. So some of it'll break off. And these are the massive icebergs you see on the news that are getting stuck and disrupting things. And they give them names, they're so big. So right now, I think the popular one is A23A. And you can monitor it with satellites and see where it is. And these things are like as big as US states. They're absolutely massive. And so when you're looking at it from a ship, it just looks like a wall of ice. You can't see around it.
Like land.
Yeah, it looks like land. So those are from the ice shelf. And it's concerning that those are breaking up. And we've already lost part of the Larsen ice shelf. And yeah, we're concerned about losing more.
You having so much experience down there, what feels different? What sort of firsthand things have you noticed changing? People
ask that a lot. I'm not sure I really noticed anything. I mean, we noticed some small changes, but it's hard to really quantify it. Like this is a really big ice year. We're seeing the ice change. So in some areas of the continent, we're seeing more sea ice, and in some areas less. One thing we noticed just year by year, depending on the sea ice year, if it was a good ice year or a bad ice year, you see the dynamics between krill and salps change. And that's a bit of concern because when you're losing sea ice, the krill need to feed under that sea ice. So when it's a bad ice year, salps tend to outcompete the krill. And that's bad for the entire ecosystem because all of the marine mammals depend on the krill for food.
Far tastier than a salp.
Well, this is the thing about all this stuff is the relationship between glaciers and deep sea. This is, after all, a deep sea podcast. But the way in which that works is when the glaciers travel down the mountainside, they pick up stones and rocks and boulders, and then they slowly grind them into these big black angular blocks. So they look like almost like they've been like tombstone type of things, And then when it breaks off and ultimately flows out to sea and the iceberg melts, by the time the iceberg is seriously melting, you're probably pretty far offshore. And then these rocks just fall out of it. So it's called ice rafted debris, or IRDs. Some people call them drop stones, but we're seeing them all on those subdives. We're seeing them everywhere. And each and every one of them is completely populated by deep sea animals because you're delivering
a hard substrate.
Yeah. I mean, some of them are like big old boulders, like enormous big boulders, and they're you can tell they're IRDs because they're this really black, smooth, just angular things because they've just been eroded and grinded away down the mountainside all this time, and then suddenly they're floating out to sea in an ice cube, and then plop, and then they fall to 5,000 meters.
It's like a river stone in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, so there is, those physical connections between what's going on the continent and what's happening at 5,000 meters nearby is pretty striking.
In general, when we're talking about the Antarctic benthos, we describe that the diversity and the biomass vary highly on small spatial scales. And a lot of that reason is because of the drop stones. So in one area, a lot of these bays were glaciated in the past and have retreated. And so we can do a dive, like a sub dive, in one bay, and it's just kind of flat and sand, soft sediment. And then you could move further out of the bay and find a patch of drop stones. And maybe it's only 100 meters away, but the biomass and the diversity varies significantly on that small scale. And that's because of the drop stones and that hard substrate that allows for the diversity and those animals to live on. So it absolutely is connected. So this glaciated region definitely is connected to everything that's happening in the deep sea.
Really tricky for habitat models because this isn't like, here is a rocky habitat, here is a sandy habitat. This is rocky habitat being airdropped into what would be sedimentary. So it's really hard to then quantify because, like you say, it's like super patchy, it's super localized. You can't generalize over hundreds of kilometers.
Yeah, and the other unique thing about Antarctica is obviously the temperatures is very, very low. So these trenches are the only places in the world which are super deep sea and sub-zero, and at certain depths become sub-zero. And the significance of that is, we've probably spoke about this a few times on the podcast under various different contexts, but, high pressure, low temperature have the same perturbing effect on the cell. So if you want to go deep, you need to be warm. So places like Red Sea and stuff like that, if you're deep and cold, you'll tend to become shallower. And so for the idea is there's lots of deep sea species in Antarctica were actually much shallower than you find them other places because that sub-zero condition is another perturbing effect in addition to the high pressure.
Yeah.
And so the guys worked it out in the 80s. I think it was something along the lines of a shift in 2 degrees Celsius is the same as a shift of 1,000 meters.
Oh, I hadn't heard it actually spelled out. That's cool.
Yeah. So if you look at somewhere like we were working before, like, I don't know, Mariana Trench is maybe 2 point something degrees. At the same depth, there's over a 2 degree decrease in temperature here. So you'd expect a lot of deep sea stuff to be shallower. And to be honest, I think it's not as obvious from what we've seen so far, but there are signs of it. So there's enormous aggregations of rat tails, for example, are happening shallower than we'd normally see them. I mean, out in the Porcupine Abyssal Plain in the North Atlantic, it's normally about 4,800 meters. You see a lot of these things, but here it's between 3,800 meters and 4,000 meters is the real sweet spot for tons of these things. But over the next few weeks, hopefully we'll work shallower and see how far up some of these quintessentially deep sea species are going here. And it's almost certainly to do with temperature.
It's sometimes called deep sea emergence, and the cold water corals or the deep water corals that we were talking about in the last episode, like the depth variation with these same species was huge. So that I was looking at them, say, around Ireland at 300 meters. But in the fjords of Norway, where it's much colder, you can scuba dive with them. They're at 40 meters. And we get the similar in the fjords here. We get sort of deep stuff coming a lot shallower.
It's the same in Alaska when I work up there. You can see species that normally we just see in the deep sea off the shelf, and we see them in the fjords in Alaska, like the red tree coral. Do you think that's why we're not seeing so many pycnogonids, Al?
I don't know. I was under the impression they were quite abundant around here, you know? And because last time I was here, we had a time-lapse stills camera and we put it at 2,000 meters and there were 2 or 3 of them wandering around. And that was a time-lapse. I was taking a picture, I believe, every minute for about 10 hours and we saw 2 or 3 just walking past the camera. So from that, I thought, well, there's obviously quite a lot of sea spiders going on. But then we deployed that first set of landers and one of them was similar depth and a sea spider did come along. It walked around the arm a little bit. You can see it on the latest YouTube video we put out. Just a little plug there. But I haven't seen one since. I caught sight of one in the sub. I don't think we recorded it, but just at the end of the dive, I was looking out and I was like, here's a sea spider. And we couldn't quite get the image of it, but I was under the impression there was loads. And I'm disappointed. I thought this place would be swarming with giant sea spiders and I was going to fight them all.
And they get big, don't they? There's gigantism.
Yeah.
I'm disappointed as well and quite surprised because we do not see them on the peninsula in scuba depths. I know they are shallower in South Georgia and also in the Ross Sea around McMurdo. But on the peninsula, I've never, ever, even once in 10 years, seen one scuba diving. But in the subs, 200-300 meters, we see them regularly. Every day we see, multiple different species of pycnogonid. And so I was kind of under this impression that maybe they're just deeper than, any scuba depth. So 200-300 meters, yep, there's a sea spider. And so I really assumed we'd see more with the landers and your sub dives. And so I've just been really surprised by that.
Yeah, maybe we need to go shallower. I mean, the moment our shallowest one is just over 1,000 meters. We do have a potential 800 meter site on the list of things to do before we go, but everyone's a bit reluctant to go to 3 digits because it's just not our jam.
It's just not how you roll.
No, I know. But I think we're going to have to do it because we've been all over the deep bit and we're just going to have to crawl back out. But it'll be worth it if we got some good sea spider pycnogonid stuff because they're such a cool animal.
Yeah, that's why I think it's valuable information to have because we don't actually know their depth range. I know it's not shallow, and I know, yes, it can be around 200 meters, but where does that line, where does it stop? When do they stop being so abundant,
That last one we saw was definitely the only one we recorded so far. I'm pretty sure that was 1,800 or 2,000. Can't remember now, but that's a good chunk away. But yeah, we should make that a priority for the next week. I want to get eyes on. I want to intense eye contact with a pycnogonid.
Enough fish.
Enough fish. I'm done with fish. So done with rat tails. I'd happily never see another rat tail as long as I live.
You've had a lot of the grossest ones you've seen.
And the most disgusting lot as well, yeah.
Yeah. Grand. Well, I let you two go for your drinkies.
I think it's only right that you do.
It was really lovely to meet you, Shaylyn. Thank you for coming on.
Yes, it was nice to chat.
Yeah, this is
Thanks
good.
for having me. Thanks, Al, for the gentle nudge to join.
Yeah, it's like you're doing a podcast. We need an Antarctic person.
Get in your bunk.
You with the woolly hat. Get in the bunk. We're talking.
And keep in touch with where and when you'll be places, and I'll do the same.
Thanks for the chat.
It's great to meet you.
All right. Cheers, Tom. Bye.
Bye. So let's swing by for a quick coffee with Andrew, where we're going to talk about some common names and, interestingly, some lost Maori names for some of our local species here and the way that these local and indigenous knowledge names can be lost, as well as naming species after people.
Coffee's ready!
Historically, common names have just formed, and so they're very local. They span multiple species, but
Yeah.
it feels like we're getting a little bit more organized with them. Now it's part of a description.
Yeah, this is kind of an interesting one because it sort of flows into discussions we're having now as a country here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, which is the role of the Treaty of Waitangi and tangata whenua, tangata tereti. And I encountered this when I was knocking together this little book on coastal fishes. And they wanted te reo names. And yes, there were quite a few species that had te reo names. Some of them were iconic, tuna for eel, and there were a whole host of different names, many of which I suspect actually were applied to different ages and stages and sizes. But the really sad thing, as I was going through the dictionary, was there were some 170 names, possibly more, te reo names which just meant fish. Now, these names meant more than just fish. You know, they would have had quite specific attachments to this species, this sex, this time of the year. Don't eat it, it's lean, it's horrible. Eat it, it's nice and fat. You know, all those connotations, but they've all been lost when the cultures collided. There wasn't the sort of thinking we have an oral culture and we have a written culture, and one is technologically advanced and therefore is likely to subsume the other. Nobody thought to sit down and, right, we better catch this now because it's going to disappear if we're not careful. And this is what's happened. These names have disappeared, or the meaning and them, where they're attached. So common names are important. In some cases, they can be more stable than the Latin.
They do move around a lot. But another thing that's worth pointing out is that they have different uses. So we are, when we're speaking taxonomically, it is a genetic lineage, it is a lineage of these animals. But that's just one way that we apply names. And like you say, it might be applied to what they're used for. It might be a seasonal thing. It might be a life stage. So I know we have a chat a lot. If we're going to do it, we need to do it right and not sort of force square pegs into round holes, if that makes sense, because that we are then updating or reinforcing these meanings, and maybe we're distorting it when we do that, because it wasn't down to a genetic lineage. It was down to how this animal was used and where it was collected and when it was collected.
So it has with it, in its te reo name, there's a lot of Mataronga Māori, there's a lot of traditional Māori knowledge, and those two have become disconnected now. And I don't know how you'd reconnect them. I don't know if it's even possible. But this is sort of part of the, I guess, aspirations of being a bicultural country, that Māori people will start to reconnect with their naming systems. And it'd be interesting to see in 100 years' time how many of the names that we use now, how many of those survive, and how many of the more bilingual usage or even replacement. So this is a discussion, and perhaps you'll be dealing with it more than I will be.
Yeah, it's not a quick and easy answer. It's not a quick copy-paste, replace kind of thing. The meanings behind the words and the usage of that naming is different.
Yes.
And so we need to make sure that we don't tape over that by making something oversimplified. By just swapping some names, we've lost actually that wider meaning of where that name was applied.
So there's one or two quite good websites about some interesting scientific names. John McCosker, who's an eel specialist, was telling me when he was out, a colleague of his who created a genus in honour of a very special lady friend. And it was, the species were Dulciata and, all these gooey, lovely names. And then the relationship went sideways.
And all the new species.
All the new species, dementia. And yes. These things are a double-edged, I tell you.
Dirty laundry in public.
I know.
Oh, dear.
I know. So patronyms are an interesting one. So there's quite a push against them now because it's seen as being paternalistic. But if people have done the mahi, done the work, then it's nice to honour them.
It is, within the culture, it is a way of honouring someone who's done a great deal within this group, and it's sort of a mutual thing. But I do see how it looks externally, and it's weird to, I don't know, put a person's name on something in the natural world, but I think it makes sense within the culture of people who describe species.
Well, one group which is particularly rich in patronyms are the Antarctic notothenoids. and the leparids and things like that. Zoarchids, there's a huge number there that are just named after people.
It seems to just be the way in Antarctica, because
I know.
Don Walsh had a whole bay, I think, named after him. And
Yes.
one of our managers here has a mountain, is it? Or
Something like that. Yeah, and all the geological features have patronyms. And okay, some of the Antarctic explorers, you can understand, let's name that mountain after the Erebus and Terror. I mean, Mount Erebus was the expedition by James Ross into the Ross Sea. The sea itself is named after James Ross. That struck me when we started getting a lot of Antarctic species. This awful lot of patronyms here. Surely the more imagination than that.
Something a bit more descriptive, unless it looks like Ross. If you squint, that's kind of how it looks.
And tap the Admiral a bit more.
And that concludes this episode of the Deep Sea Podcast. I don't know quite where we'll be when we next speak to you, but we'll try and get an episode out. Hopefully we'll be doing exciting things and meeting interesting people that we can have a chat to on the show. Things might not be whole podcasty episodes, but keep an eye on our social feeds, because quite often we put little tidbits on there, little bits of video, of what we've been up to. If it doesn't make a whole episode, we might just stick a little bit on there. And I just wanted to say a little final thank you, really. This will be our intrepid editor and social media and science communicator guru, Georgia's last episode. And I just can't thank her enough for everything she's done for the show in just keeping it turning on behind the scenes. This comes out as quite a slick little production, and it's certainly not because we are good presenters or interviewers. It is because a lot of editing goes into it, and she does a fantastic job writing up these long form interviews as blog posts and running our social media so that you're aware of what's going on. We are really going to miss you, Georgia, and we wish you all the best in the future. Thank you for all the help. So until the next time, wherever we may be, we'll deep see you next time, and I miss you already. Oh, and Merry Christmas. If you would like to advertise with the Deep Sea Podcast, feel free to get in touch. Our audience is primarily young people with an interest in science, often undergraduates or people considering a degree in marine science, but it also includes established scientists. Feel free to get in touch if you're interested in reaching these groups.